Excellent. So you're able, it's okay to see that?
Yeah,
Yeah, excellent stuff.
brilliant.
So yes, I'm delighted to be here this evening, and I'm going to talk to you about nocturnal wildlife and why it needs darkness, and how to share the night sky with our bats. So you know yourself, we have plenty of terrestrial mammals on the island, and this includes nine of our resident bat species. And we have many extinctions and arrivals since the Ice Age. But the main point is that when do we encounter our wildlife? So the majority of our wildlife is shy and secretive. And so the majority of them are actually nocturnal, and we rarely encounter them, not unless we're out early in the woodlands or out for a walk early in the morning or at dusk. So this is the main point, is that the majority of our mammals are nocturnal, and we're daytime mammals, but because of our intrusion of light into the nighttime to make us feel safe, or whichever reasons we have for the amount of lighting, we trespass into the landscape. As a consequence, we trespass into the nocturnal world. So before I go into a little bit more, I'll just talk a wee bit about bats in general. So at this point, we now have 1,500 species worldwide, with the most recent, probably about a month ago, being a new species to the actual list. And all of our bats are split into two groups. I just like to call them the yin and yang. Um, but the majority of our species are insectivores. So over 800 species are across the world purely feed on insects. But there are many other types of prey items that bats will feed on. All bats in Ireland are insectivorous, and we have nine resident bat species in Ireland and two vagrant species. And if you're out in the evening times and you've encountered bats, the majority of species that you probably encounter are the pipistrelles, such as the common and soprano pipistrelle, are two most common bat species across the island. And if you're a bit of a birder and you've noticed bats flying early in the evening time in amongst the swifts and the swallows before they go to bed, then that's going to be your Leisler's bats, are one species that comes out around sunset. So in relation to what do our guys look like, so this is our nine species of bat. Um, and I get many phone calls asking me, I've got a brown bat, which species is it? But as you can see, most of our bats are little brown jobs. So it's more inclined, the way we can actually tell them apart is looking at particular features, such as those wonderful big long ears of the brown long-eared bat, or listen to them on the bat detector. And this is where each of our species have different types of calls or frequencies, sounds, and different rhythms to their actual call. And that's how we tell much of them apart. Now, all bats in Ireland are protected under the EU Habitats Directive and the Irish Wildlife Act. And the lesser horseshoe bat has a little extra protection. It's an Annex 2 species, while all the other species of bats are Annex 4 species of bat. Now, bats are a landscape species. They're pretty much found all across the island. Now, our common bat species are found basically everywhere, while there's other bat species such as lesser horseshoe bat, which is confined to the western seaboard counties of Mayo, Galway, Clare, Limerick, Cork and Kerry. And then there's other bat species such as the whiskered and natters, which are more inclined to be found in really good deciduous woodlands. So some bat species have limited distribution, while others are pretty much found all across the island. But bats will roost in our structures, they'll roost in trees, they roost on the ground. And when they emerge in the evening to feed, they disperse through the landscape, following those wonderful linear habitats of hedgerows and tree lines, or rivers or canals, all to allow them to actually traverse through the landscape to their favorite feeding areas. So bats rarely forage in a clump or in large groups. They literally disperse so that they're actually evenly feeding on insects across the landscape. As a consequence of being needing to actually disperse through the landscape, because they're nocturnal creatures, they do need these dark corridors to allow them to effectively fly through the landscape to their feeding areas and back to their roosting sites in the morning time. And this is where our lighting trespass can be problematic. So Where bats like to feed is anywhere where is any habitats that actually provide shelter for insects to gather or allow insects to breed and emerge so the bats can take advantage of them. And our bats are exclusively insectivorous feeders and they consume on hundreds up to thousands of bats each night, depending on which bat species we're talking about and which insect prey items they're feeding on. So when it comes to lighting, the trouble is what we call artificial light at nighttime, or LAN, which is now considered to be a major threat to biodiversity across the entire planet, especially to nocturnal species. So, in relation to bats, light levels as low as a typical moon level of zero point 0.1 lux can actually alter the flight activity of bats. And one really good example of this is a medieval tower that the Galway Bat Group monitors in just outside Gort in County Galway. And this medieval tower is a brown long-eared roost and has four, as you know yourself, medieval tower, four sides to the actual four-story structure. It's located in the middle of a turlock and agricultural field. And when the bats emerge at night time, they emerge from all four sides of the medieval tower. But on bright moonlit nights, on the side that the moonlight is actually shining on that particular night, the bats do not emerge on that side of the medieval tower, but prefer to emerge on the darker side, so it can quickly emerge into the scrub vegetation and away from potential predation from owls. So even a moonlit night can actually change the habit of the actual bats as they're emerging. So you can imagine what our lit up landscape can actually do in relation to the lighting we have in our landscape. So any level of artificial light above moonlight can actually result in masking the natural rhythms that allow our wildlife, our creatures to actually continue their foraging, mating, and even their circadian rhythm throughout the season. Particularly for bats, the impact of a LAN can be in relation to attracting insects. So you know yourself, all of our street lamps, you'll see clouds of insects attracted around the actual lights. Now the impact this has on bats, because I have people frequently say, well, you can see bats feeding around the lights, but we have 9 species of bat and have different light sensitivities. So the bats that can actually feed around our street lights are ones that are tolerant or semi-tolerant of lighting. But there's numerous species that are highly light sensitive. And so there's a double whammy here. So there's insects being attracted to the light. The light sensitive species can't feed around these accumulations of insects, but not just the impact of the insects around the lighting. Those insects are no longer in the actual dark habitats to provide prey items for the light sensitive species. So there's a double impact there. And then lighting itself, if there's lighting in the landscape, those potential foraging habitats, if they're lit up, then they're no longer suitable for light sensitive bat species to feed along. But also, lighting is actually a barrier. While we wouldn't see it as a physical barrier, for nocturnal creatures, it is a physical barrier and it fragments the landscape, preventing them being able to actually move through the lit up areas. So light sensitive bat species are confined to the dark areas and can't fly through lit up areas. And then bats will frequently need to actually drink. So if waterways or rivers or canals or the lake edges are lit up, this reduces where bats can actually go drink in darkness. So that's the main areas that lighting can actually impact on bats. So just to emphasize where I talk about different bat species have different light sensitivities. So I'm just taking 3 bat species just to illustrate this. So when you actually consider the different bat species, so it's really good to actually think about the morphology of the bat. What way does the bat fly? Where does it fly? And at what time does it emerge around sunset? And this gives you an idea of its potential light sensitivity. So the first bat we're going to look at is the Leisler's bat. So this is the bat that I mentioned earlier that can often be frequently seen foraging, flying amongst the swifts and the swallows early in the evening time. So this lets you know this bat can actually emerge early when it's still relatively bright. It hasn't gotten dark. So as a consequence, this is a light tolerant bat species. It's a large, fast-flying bat. It hunts for insects in the open sky, so in open habitat, and as a consequence, it emerges around sunset. So it's able to tolerate, and as a consequence, it will feed around streetlights. The next species is going towards semi-tolerant species. This is like our soprano pipistrelle and our common pipistrelle. These are small, agile flying bats. They hunt for insects along the linear habitat, so an edge species, and emerges around 10 to 20 minutes after sunset. So it's still relatively bright, so it's a semi-tolerant when it comes to light levels. But then we have the brown long-eared bat, and this is a bat that is a medium-sized bat. It's slow flying. It hunts for insects inside woodlands, so already a dark habitat, and it emerges about 30-40 minutes after sunset. So this is at a time when it is dark. So it lets you know that this is a highly light sensitive bat species. So that's our three different categories for Irish bats. Leislers, tolerant of light. Soprano pipistrelle, semi-tolerant of light. And then brown long-eared bat, light sensitive. So as a consequence, the impacts of lighting is of very different degrees for these three different types of species. So all of our bat species in Ireland can be actually given a light sensitivity category, and this is based on Rydell, a Swedish bat worker who unfortunately is no longer with us, but he did amazing work when it came to the impacts of lighting on our bat species. So he categorized all of European bats. So in relation to our 9 resident bat species, we have one light tolerant species, which is our Leisler's bat. We have 3 semi-tolerant, which is our 3 pipistrelles, Maltesian pipistrelle, common pipistrelle, and soprano pipistrelle. But then the remaining 5 bat species are all light-sensitive bat species, and these are species that tend to be less common in the Irish landscape, and they tend to be confined to more wooded or mosaic habitats. So they're rarely found in the more urban areas or the more open landscapes. So these are more depending on darker habitats, and they all emerge when it's well dark in the evening time. So just to illustrate this, we're just going to talk about the brown long-eared roost monitoring scheme, which is one of the schemes that Bat Conservation Ireland manages and runs. And this scheme has been running since 2007, and it's literally surveyors go to brown long-eared roosts across the country, and they start their survey 20 minutes after sunset. But one of the things that the volunteers were asked is to note the time of the first bat that emerges, first brown long-eared bat that emerges during the survey. And this was compared to other data that was gathered, such as weather data. And in relation to the actual cloud levels, the volunteers were asked to note if it's clear sky, a patchy cloud cover, or full cloud cover. And the wonderful statistician Steve did his magic on this, and he showed that on a full cloudy night, the first brown long-eared bat to emerge is earlier than what the first bat will emerge on a clear sky night. So you can see just even from that simple time that the bats emerge at gives you an illustration that they are seeking out, checking the weather, checking the cloud cover. When is it dark? Is it suitable to emerge at this point? And so the bats emerge when the light levels are appropriate for that particular species to emerge. And it tends to be to do with reducing predation from such species as owls. Another illustration in relation to light sensitivity. So Daubenton's bat is also a less light sensitive bat species. And again, one of Bat Conservation Ireland's monitoring schemes. This is the All Ireland Daubenton's Boardway Survey. And surveyors go out and survey a 1 kilometre length of river or canal. And they start their survey 40 minutes after sunset, which coincides when these bats are out active and foraging on aquatic insects. But a large amount of information is collected by the surveyors, and one of them is in relation to is there lights present around the survey spot as part of the survey scheme. And it was noted that 48% of the waterways surveyed had some sort of lighting along its length. And surveys also collected data in relation to what colour lighting. And again, This was put into a model, and it showed that, just to give you a contrast, waterways that had no trees had less Daubenton's bat activity, while waterways that had trees on both sides of the tree bank had a much higher level of Daubenton's activity. In contrast, if those survey spots had light, and it didn't matter whether it was white light, orange light, or yellow light, if there was lighting present, this was significantly reduced the Daubenton's bat activity at the survey spot, clearly showing the negative impact of lighting along our waterways. So this is just another example as well. Lesser horseshoe bats, another light sensitive bat species, but it does this lovely light sampling before it emerges in the evening. And this is just a wee video just to show you this. And so literally, if you're at a lesser horseshoe roost and you're waiting for it to emerge, you'll see the bats individually circling and doing this lovely little flying dance up to the actual emergence point, checking the light level conditions to make sure that they emerge at a light level that is suitable for them. So I'll just play this, and you'll see the bats coming up to the entry to the exit point, and then as they exit, you hear the lovely warble of typical of the lesser horseshoe bat. It's a lovely sound, and the bats will continuously do that until the whole colony has exited. So when it comes to how can we share the night sky with bats, so they're a landscape species, so we have to be so conscious of the amount of lighting we have, artificial lighting we have. Where is it? Is it needed in that area? And when is it necessary? So it's really important that there's a risk assessment of lighting on biodiversity. And this needs to take into consideration, where are the bat roosts located? What are the principal commuting routes to and from these bat roosts? Where are their preferred feeding habitats? And when it comes to a lighting plan, how will the potential impact of this lighting plan on emerging points? Will it sever the landscape for the colony that's using this landscape? Will it reduce the foraging habitat? So we need to avoid key areas to ensure that our bats can continue to use the landscape. So avoidance is best, and then where avoidance cannot be undertaken, mitigation needs to be implemented as a last resort. So the Bat Conservation Trusts in the UK have a wonderful set of guidelines that were updated in 2023, and it's have the reference there at the bottom of the slide. But if you just Google it, it's on their website, and it has it's very detailed, and it's got lots of lovely case studies to look into, a couple of which I will discuss later on in the presentation. So if lighting is deemed necessary, then it needs to be designed and located to ensure minimum impact on local bat populations. So in summary, the essence of the actual guidelines literally wants to ensure that if lighting is used, that the luminaires that are used don't have UV elements to the actual lighting, because the UV elements is what attracts the insects away from the dark zones to gather around the luminaire. So as a consequence, LED luminaires have no UV or very little UV components to it. Also, LED to the point now is a system of luminaires that can be highly controlled, and there's a great variance in the actual spectrum and the color of the actual light that can be available from the LED luminaires. So this is the type of lighting that tends to be encouraged if it is required. So when it comes to bats, it's trying to get those warm white light sources. So if you typically look at the street lights that we have in place around the country at the moment, they tend to be around 4,000 to 6,000 kelvins, depending whether it's a motorway or a regional road or a local road. So when you look at those lighting, if you see that stark blue source to the actual white light, that tells you it's greater than 4,000 kelvins. And what has a less impact on the bats is getting towards the yellow source of that white light. So 2700 kelvins or lower. When it comes to lesser Herschel, it's no lighting, but if lighting is definitely needed, then it's 2200 Kelvin, so you get into that lovely yellow soft glow of white lights, LED lights, and that's what we're trying to get towards. Light sources should also feature a wavelength that's no greater than wavelengths that are higher than 550 nanometers to avoid a component of light that is considered to be disturbing to bats. There's also consideration how high are the actual column heights for the luminaires, and it's trying to actually decrease the dispersion of light, so trying to have the shortest column heights possible to ensure that light is directed where it's actually needed. And then it's also trying to reduce the amount of light pollution going up in the skies. So it's making sure that the luminaires just shine directly to the ground, and it's only shining uh, uh, where we actually need it, and it's not dispersing up into the sky or to the sides towards habitats and areas where it's not needed. So it's just these simple guidance, and then you build up on that. If you can get these elements right, then it does greatly reduce the amount of trespass in the landscape. So some of the the guidelines have key messages as well, which are really well worth reading. So some of the key messages I've highlighted is it's important to minimize elan close to vegetation, particularly for the slower flying species, so the light sensitive bat species such as the brown lung-eared bat, and need to increase dense vegetation in urban landscape to provide not just roosting opportunities but also protection against elan. So you kind of consider if there's a pathway and there's a requirement that that pathway is lit up, but having a really dense tree line to one side of that vegetate to the one side of that path, and that means that a dense vegetation will buffer and prevent light trespass to the other side of the hedgerow or the tree line, and it makes sure that one side has got a lovely dark zone while there's still a lit up path for human use on the other side. So landscaping and really good landscaping can provide a buffer to reduce the actual light trespass, and this is particularly important in our urban areas. And then when considering how bats move through the landscape, elan has been shown to be particularly harmful along our river corridors, near our woodland edges and our hedgerows. So this is particularly important when it comes to our urban areas, especially where there's canals and rivers flowing through our towns and our villages and our cities. And these tend to be the last dark conduits for nocturnal creatures such as bats to be able to actually move through these urban areas. So it's really, really important that we retain these ecological function dark corridors. So by putting greenways and putting lit up greenways along our rivers and canals can be highly detrimental to allowing nocturnal creatures to use what these were traditionally dark conduits through our landscape. And then even all this lighting on bridges, aesthetic lighting just to light up the actual structure, and more often not is lighting that's way too brightened and it tends to be directed up into the sky. So it has a double negativity as in causing light pollution and also preventing bats being able to actually pass underneath the actual bridge. So it's kind of thinking about where is our light trespass going and how can we actually reduce that. So lighting is a barrier. So this is one of the main things I like to get across. So lighting is a physical barrier to nocturnal movements of wildlife. So lighting on bridges, as I mentioned, over bridges, over rivers and canals is a barrier of bat movement up and down the waterways. Lighting on greenways and blueways, these continuous lighting barriers along towpaths can go on for kilometers and kilometers. That's a continuous lighting barrier. If and especially when we actually don't use much of these areas at night time, it's the consideration, can we actually turn them off at night time? Can we dim them? Can they actually be activated when there's human activity on the actual towpath? So they're dimmed down to the lowest possible, and then they're activated when a lighting detector is activated through movement. So it's that sort of consideration. But if we're going into rural areas with these greenways and blueways, there's no need for lighting along these wonderful dark corridors. Kind of, it should we really need to consider where do we need lighting and only to use lighting when it is essentially needed. Lighting in public parks, especially otherwise dark areas, public parks that are actually locked up at night time, or even if we consider a lot of car parks of schools, libraries, and they're still left on at night time, even though these centres are closed after 5 o'clock or 8 o'clock when it comes to libraries. It's making sure that such areas the lighting is actually turned off when it's not needed. Lighting of aesthetic buildings, churches, is one of the main things that we tend to light up. It's a waste of energy and it's often a massive amount of upward lighting causing light pollution. So Wright himself, when he was doing his surveys in the 1980s and 1990s, documented many brown long-eared roofs in churches. Revisited them in 2016 and found that 35% of the churches were no longer bat roofs, and this coincided with direction of floodlights on such buildings. Now, I just to illustrate, I did a small lighting experiment on one of the canals in Dublin, and we use the Dog Benton's bat as our indicator species. So along a 200-meter stretch of the canal, we put in these tree luminaires. Now these are the typical heritage luminaires. They're not the ones that the BCT would recommend because these sort of lights just disperse light everywhere. But we wanted to show how detrimental these sort of heritage lights could be. So as part of the experiment, we put up three of these luminaires with generators, and before we turned them on, we had 2 weeks of them turned off with 5 static locations. So these are bat detectors that are automatically come on before sunset and turn off after sunrise. So they're continuously triggered by echolocation calls, and they were literally put on poles inside along the banks of the canal and left to record for 2 weeks with no lighting. And so you can see the mean number of dog bettings pass on the actual graph here is in blue. So that's when there was no lights. And then we turned on the lights for 2 weeks, and you can see that in the red, the significant reduction in dog bettings activity as a result of the lighting being on and trespassing onto the surface of the canal. So a very basic experiment just to show the impact of lighting on bats. So one of the things that I encourage when it comes to actually assessing the potential impact of a lighting design on bats is asking the lighting engineer to do a horizontal illuminance map. And this is where the actual lighting engineer maps the proposed lighting scheme and shows where the actual light is going to spill and how far it's going to spill, and the contour map of the lux levels at different points along the actual zone of lighting. So generally the contours are 5 contours, and they go from 5 lux all the way down to 0.1 lux. And at 0.1 lux you want to have, and that the light dissipates before it actually hits a habitat that's important for the bats. And this horizontal luminance maps allows the bat surveyor to actually look and see what is the potential impact of a proposed lighting design on the bats and where adjustments are needed to actually reduce the actual impact. So this is an example, and so it really depends on the luminaire that's used, where the lighting needs to be directed, and the lighting engineer can actually tweak this sort of stuff, especially with LED luminaires, because they can have different shields on the front, the back, or the sides of the actual luminaire to reduce the dispersal of light away from the actual luminaires, and to ensure that it doesn't disperse behind it onto habitats, or it doesn't disperse in front of it onto other habitats. So a lighting model can really help to actually foresee how the actual potential lighting design is going to be in the landscape. So it is. I mentioned about lesser horseshoe bats. They are highly sensitive and they are an annex to bat species. So they are the most, they have the highest level of protection of all of our bat species. There's 41 SACs in Ireland for this particular species. And it's been shown that lesser horseshoe bats avoid commuting along hedgerows or linear habitats where there's a 3.7 lux level. So that's quite low, but at that point the bats will actually change their commuting routes to avoid areas that have that amount of light on it. And one of the conservation objectives when it comes to protecting our SSCs, that is, there should be no significant increase in artificial light intensity adjacent to a qualifying roost or along the commuting routes within 2.5 kilometres of lesser Hershey roosts. So the 2.5 kilometre is literally the radius where the majority of the colony will actually needs to actually be able to feed effectively over the actual season. So that is one of the conservation objectives. So it just shows how important it is to ensure we don't light up our in vicinity of our lesser Hershey populations. So there's another project I'm involved in at the moment, and this is primarily with the Vincent Wildlife Trust and a number of county councils in lesser Hershey areas have requested the Vincent Wildlife Trust to do a circuscape modelling of particular urban areas in the west of Ireland. So a number of urban areas have been done at this stage, and one of my jobs is like literally to ground truth the model that has been produced by the Vincent Wildlife Trust. So what the Vincent Wildlife Trust has done is literally assess the landscape around these urban areas to actually find are there habitats remaining the urban and the edge of the urban going into the rural area around these urban areas, and if there are habitats available for lesser Hershey bats, what is the actual linkage and the connectivity of the landscape in these areas to allow bats to move around or through these urban areas. So the Vincent Wildlife Trust produced a landscape model, and my job was to actually see, okay, we have the landscape model. Do the bats actually use the the habitats that have been highlighted by the actual model? So for this, this required me to do a static surveillance. So this again is using those detectors that we can put out and are set to record before sunset and turn off at sunrise. So they're continuously recording throughout the night, hopefully capturing lesser Hershey bats as they fly by. And this is particularly important for lesser Hershey bats because lesser Hershey bats echolocate at 110 to 113 kilohertz. So this is way outside our hearing range. It's such a high frequency. When the bats produce a call, it attenuates very quickly into the atmosphere, into the air. As a consequence, you need to be within 5 meters to actually be able to pick up the lesser Hershey bat, and also to be directly in front of the bat as it's flying towards the microphone of your bat detector. So it can be quite difficult finding these little guys. So using statics that are left out in the landscape is a really effective way to actually try and detect them along these linear habitats. So for this ground truthing, I would have used 20 of these mini bat 2s, and they're put on a pole or on a tree at 1.5 meter height, with the microphone facing down the length of the linear habitat in hope that as a lesser Hershey bat flies up the linear habitat, it's detected by the unit. And at each location, the unit is set out for 7 nights of recording. So just to give you an example, this is the Galway City model. So you can see you've got this, the remaining potential habitat for the lesser Hershey bats to commute is actually primarily around the outskirts of Galway City, with areas over here to the west of the model around Barna, going up into Knocknacarra, crossing the River Corb, or just north of NUI Galway, or University of Galway is now called, over towards Menlo, and then down towards Merlin Park and the Loch Italia coastal area of the city. But as you can see, there's very little red tendrils of habitat in the city centre anymore, and even along the River Corb, it's now too lit up. There's very little dark corridors for the bats to actually be able to forage into the city centre now. So as part of my ground truthing, I put out 60 locations in 2024 and 60 locations in 2025. So you can see the dispersal of it across the city centre and the outskirts of the city centre. But unfortunately, we only got lesser Hershey's bats on the pink locations. So you can see that the majority of the lesser Hershey bats were found in the Menlo, north of Galway City. There is a lesser horseshoe in the Menlo area, so this is this colony here. And then there's a couple of hits of lesser horseshoe bats in the Barna Woods, Salt Hill area to the west of the actual city. But really good habitat, the like of Lochtalia or Merlin Park, we didn't get any lesser horseshoe bats. And that's potentially primarily due to the amount of lighting there's now in the city. I've only just finished this work, so I have to do a little more investigation over the winter months. But this just gives you an idea of while there is potential habitat there for the lesser horseshoe bats, but due to the amount of lighting associated with this urban area, unfortunately, those habitats are not available to the local lesser horseshoe bat population. So what can we do? So I've got these graphics from the Dark Skies, wonderful Dark Skies movement. It's particularly associated with the Mayo National Park. There's a wonderful work going on over there. And if you want to see Dark Skies in operation, how they can actually design really good lighting design, go to the town of Newport in County Mayo. This has been hailed as the dark sky town, and have redesigned the lighting in the actual town to reduce trespass, reduce intrusion into the night sky, and to bring down the light levels, bring towards the actual yellow color, so it's really pleasant to actually wander around the town. The buildings are aesthetically lit up with appropriate lighting, so it's a lovely example of what can be done by really good lighting design. So what they're trying to do is literally reducing the amount of white light, reducing the brightness of the white light, and where that white light or where light is being shone. And we're going towards to the right of the slide where it's warm colours and the lighting is shining to where it's actually needed. It's not bouncing off walls, it's not too bright, and it's pleasant to actually wander through this sort of lighting. So we need to stop what's on the left hand side, think about what and where lighting is really needed, and strive towards better lighting design. So going across here from reducing those globes of lighting, those heritage lighting to disperse lighting everywhere, and just using well designed and directed lighting, and then getting the appropriate colors, but only using where lighting is needed, because what's best is no lighting. But of course, lighting is needed in some circumstances, but it's only ensuring that we use lighting where it's needed. So just explain some of what I've been talking about. When it comes to the actual, what I was talking about, the Kelvin level, so that's the color temperature of the LED lights. So basically, most of our lighting is white, but whether it's a blue light or a warm light. And for bats, we're trying to go towards the warm light end of the spectrum, getting away from that stark blue light that can be quite sore on the eyes, even for ourselves. So just thinking how sore would be for the actual nocturnal creatures. So we want to go towards the white light, so less than 2700 kelvins is best. And then when it comes to the luminance, that's literally where the lighting is dispersed, the amount of light on the surfaces, the spread of the light. So we're trying to ensure that the spread of light is at the edges, it's less than 1 lux, and there's less than 1 lux near the important commuting habitats for bats. So luminance is the brightness of the light, so minimum lux levels to be used for the job that needs to be done. So just for yourselves, something that you could do in relation to your own house or your farmyard or even your work area, if there's existing lighting, it's kind of like assessing, well, is all the lighting that's existing, is it needed? And can it be reduced in particular areas? When lighting is being replaced, can we replace it with warm spectrum LED lights? And if new lighting is required, where is it needed? Is it needed? Just be conscious, is there a bat roost nearby? Are you in a lesser horseshoe bat area? And while no lighting is best, if lighting is definitely needed, if you're in lesser horseshoes, trying to get to 2200 kelvins or less. For other bat species, 2700 kelvins or less. And making sure it's the minimum lux level, so the brightness, that the lighting is directed only where it's needed, and that you're using luminaires that shine directly downward and not dispersing to the sides or upwards. So you're literally trying to adopt a system where you're reducing unnecessary lighting around our homes, around our farmyards, and at work. And so the aim is to improve the existing lighting, and where there's an opportunity, if you can't reduce the lighting, if there's an opportunity to put in more vegetation, tall vegetation to buffer and keep that lighting where it's needed and preventing it dispersing elsewhere. And if there's a chance the lighting is going to be left on and when it's not needed, can you bring it in a timer system? Can you bring in a dimmer system? So it's just kind of like thinking about how can we reduce our lighting impact on our area around us that we live in, that we work in, and as a consequence, reduce it for our nocturnal creatures. When it comes to actually new places, if you want to put up new lighting, do you really need to put it up? And when it comes to a big lighting design, like particular projects coming in, it's really important that a full bat survey is undertaken to determine if there's bat roosts nearby, what are the commuting and foraging habitats, are you in a lesser horseshoe area, or do you have light sensitive bat species in this area? And then designing a lighting plan that is bat friendly and lighting to be assessed using the horizontal luminance map to ensure that you know where the actual proposed lighting is going. So lighting only where it's needed, lighting when it's needed, and turning it off either by a timer system or making sure it is only turned on at certain times of when it's needed, and then using warm spectrum LED lights. And then couple that with a good landscape plan to actually create buffers in our landscape. So again, for lesser horseshoes, no lighting is best, but if lighting is needed, 2200 kelvins or less. For other bat species, 2700 kelvins or less. Minimum lux level, lighting to be directed only where it's needed, and luminaires to be in horizontally mounted and no upward lighting. So just a couple of case studies. In these, there's about 8 case studies in the Bat Conservation Trust guidelines, so they're really worth reading. But one of the case studies I just want to highlight it is in the UK. It's along the River Severn, and as part of facilitating greenways, green infrastructure through the actual town, they put up lighting along the bollard lighting along the actual greenways, which unfortunately was gone along the River Severn. Prior to lighting going in, lesser horseshoe bats were recorded consistently by the local bat group, moving through, being able to move through the actual city using the river and the actual dark back gardens of the residents. They're up there along the boundary of the actual river. How unfortunately, when the actual bollard lighting went in, the lesser horseshoe bats were no longer being recorded. So in negotiation with the local authority and taking into consideration public concerns about that if lighting was removed, there would be increase of accidents, increase of crime. So good public engagement, and instead the bollard lighting was taken out and ground-mounted solar-powered cowled wave-marked lighting was placed into the pathways. As a consequence, there wasn't an increase in crime, there wasn't an increase in accidents, and the lesser horseshoe bats uh, returned to actually use the river during the actual 3 years of monitoring that was undertaken by the back group. So a really good story about where when lighting is properly designed, the bats can continue to use the landscape. Another case study was a park, Southampton Common, and it was requested lighting was placed in the park, so allowed people to use it in the evening times, especially during the winter and the spring months. But as a consequence, by lighting up the park, it would have actually impacted on it as a foraging area. So lots of public participation here, lots of engagement with the public. They set up a series of different lighting experiments throughout the park, where they showed all the different colours, and lit up only they agreed to light up only the paths that were most regularly used by humans, and to so that ensure that not every path within the park was going to be lit up. But through the actual public engagement, people actually realised what the red lights meant and how it compared to green lights, yellow lights, and white lights, and whether they felt safe under this new potential red light regime. And overall, it was a very positive experiment, and as a consequence, the red lighting went in only at selected walkways to allow people to use it in the evening times, but still retaining much of it for wildlife to be able to feed and forage at night time. So that's just a couple of case studies, and that's the end of my presentation. So hopefully that gives you an insight of potential impact of lighting on bats and what we can do to actually reduce that. Thank you.